Have you ever felt like you were being watched, even when you were completely alone? That's exactly what happened to me on what was supposed to be a peaceful solo RV camping trip. Unexplainable footprints around my campsite, whispers calling my name in the dead of night, and a shadowy figure that haunts me every step of the way. Trust me, this isn't just a scary story. This actually happened. And it's why I'll never go RV camping alone again. Before we dive into the full story, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this one. Let me know in the comments, would you ever camp alone? It had been weeks since the breakup, and every corner of Seattle felt suffocating. The coffee shops we used to frequent, the parks we strolled through, it all seemed to mock me. My friends meant well, of course. Take some time for yourself, they said. Get away from the noise. So I did. With a hastily packed bag in my late father's RV, I headed east toward Glacier National Park in Montana, hoping to find the solitude I so desperately needed. The drive was long but oddly comforting. The hum of the RV's engine and the rolling landscapes of Washington and Idaho gave me time to think, or rather not think. By the time I crossed into Montana, the towering mountains and dense forests were a welcome distraction. Glacier National Park had always been on my bucket list, and now it seemed like the perfect escape. I arrived at the park just before sunset, pulling into the Apgar Visitor Center to check in. The place was surprisingly quiet for late spring, with only a handful of cars in the parking lot. Inside, I was greeted by a friendly park ranger named Tom. He was in his 50s, with a sun-weathered face and an easy smile. "You camping alone?" he asked as he handed me a map of the park. "Yeah," I replied, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Just needed a break from the city." He nodded knowingly but hesitated before speaking again. "I'd recommend staying in one of the busier campgrounds, like Apgar or Fish Creek. We've had some grizzly sightings lately, and it's safer in numbers." I assured him I'd be careful, but the idea of a crowded campground defeated the whole purpose of my trip. I wanted solitude, not the chatter of other campers. After a quick thank you, I headed deeper into the park, eventually finding a secluded spot near Lake McDonald. It was perfect, quiet, picturesque, and just isolated enough. The campsite was surrounded by towering pines, with the lake glistening in the distance. I parked the RV, stepped out, and took a deep breath. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of peace. I spent the next hour setting up camp, arranging a small fire pit, and unfolding a chair by the water's edge. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the lake, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. As the stars began to dot the night sky, I sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot tea. I told myself I could handle this, that being alone out here wasn't scary, but empowering. Yet, as the flames crackled and shadows danced among the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching me. And I didn't know it yet, but it was only the beginning. The first night started peacefully enough. After watching the fire die down, I crawled into the RV, locked the doors, and tucked myself into the small bed in the back. The hum of crickets and the occasional whisper of the wind through the trees created a natural lullaby. I felt safe, cocooned in the familiar scent of my father's old RV, a mix of worn leather and faint traces of the pine air freshener he'd always used. Sleep came quickly, but I woke up abruptly sometime after midnight. At first I wasn't sure what had startled me. The RV was dark, except for the faint glow of the moon filtering through the window blinds. I lay there, straining my ears when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from the side of the RV. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the night, it was unmistakable. My heart raced. I told myself it was probably just a branch brushing against the RV in the breeze. Still, curiosity, or maybe paranoia, got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward the window. Peeking through the blinds, I swept the beam of light outside. Nothing. Just the trees swaying gently in the wind and the shadows they cast on the ground. I stood there for a moment, convincing myself it was nothing, when the scratching came again. This time, it was louder and seemed to move along the length of the RV. My breath hitched. Was it an animal? A raccoon or a bear? The thought of a bear so close made my palms sweat. I decided against stepping outside to check, and instead retreated to the bed, pulling the blanket tightly around me. The scratching stopped as suddenly as it had started. I lay there for what felt like hours, every creak of the RV and every rustle outside magnified by my unease. Finally, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted back to sleep. When I woke the next morning, the sun was already up, and the warmth of its rays streaming through the windows made the previous night's fear feel silly. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of the noise. I decided to check the outside of the RV, just in case. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, I was struck by how serene everything looked. The lake shimmered under the sunlight, and birds chirped in the distance. I walked around the RV, inspecting the sides. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. No scratches, no signs of an animal. But then, near the back wheel, I noticed something odd. Footprints. They were faint, but visible in the soft dirt. And they weren't the paw prints of a bear or a raccoon. They looked human, but wrong. The toes were elongated, almost claw-like, and the stride was unnaturally long. A chill ran down my spine. I scanned the area, looking for other signs of visitors, but the footprints ended abruptly, as if whoever, or whatever, made them had vanished into thin air. I tried to shake off the unsettling discovery as I made breakfast. The logical side of me wanted to believe there was some kind of explanation, maybe a trick of the dirt, maybe someone from another campsite wandered too close. But no matter how I spun it, the abrupt end of the footprints gnawed at my thoughts. Determined not to let paranoia ruin my trip, I packed a small day bag and decided to hike one of the nearby trails. Glacier National Park was known for its beauty, and I wasn't going to let a creepy coincidence keep me from enjoying it. The fresh air and exercise would do me good, I told myself. The trail wove through a forest of towering pines, the sunlight dappling the ground as it filtered through the canopy. The scenery was breathtaking, and for the first hour or so, I started to relax. I even stopped to take a few photos of the lake and the mountains rising in the distance. Being alone in nature had always been a dream of mine, and I reminded myself why I'd come here, to escape, to find peace. But as I ventured deeper into the forest, the trail grew narrower, and the towering trees blocked out more of the light. The once soothing silence began to feel oppressive. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves that had accompanied me earlier seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. Slowly I scanned the forest around me, turning in a full circle. Nothing. Just endless trees stretching into the distance. Still, the feeling persisted, an itch at the back of my neck that refused to go away. I tried to laugh it off, muttering to myself, "You're just spooking yourself. It's nothing." Pushing forward, I focused on reaching a small clearing I'd seen marked on the trail map earlier. When I arrived, the view was incredible. A wide-open meadow with wildflowers and a distant view of snow-capped peaks. It was exactly the kind of scene I'd imagined when planning this trip. I sat on a fallen log, pulled out my water bottle, and took a long drink, trying to enjoy the moment. But the feeling of being watched still wouldn't leave me. I glanced behind me and froze. There, standing just at the edge of the tree line, was a figure. It was hard to make out details, partly hidden in the shadows, tall and still. I stared at it, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. The figure didn't. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering. In the split second I looked down to grab my bag, the figure was gone. I spun around, scanning the forest, but there was no sign of anyone, or anything. Gripping my bag tightly, I hurried back to the trail, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Whatever peace I'd hoped to find here had vanished, and for the first time, I questioned whether coming alone had been a mistake. Just when I thought I'd finally found the peace and quiet I was looking for, things started to feel off. Strange footprints appeared around my campsite, and the silence of the forest began to feel more oppressive than serene. But that was only the beginning. What happened next would make me question everything I thought I knew about camping alone. Before we continue, if you're as hooked as I was terrified, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit subscribe to the channel for more chilling stories. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you saw footprints like that? The hike back to my campsite felt like a race against time. The sun was still high, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the woods. Every crunch of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my pulse quicken. I tried to keep calm, telling myself it was just wildlife. Maybe a deer or a bear, but my gut told me otherwise. When I finally reached my campsite, the sight of my RV brought a wave of relief. The familiarity of its white, slightly rusted exterior felt like a shield against the unnerving vastness of the forest. I climbed inside, locked the door, and took a few deep breaths, trying to steady my racing heart. After a quick meal, I decided to distract myself by tidying up the campsite. The morning's discovery of the footprints still lingered in my mind, and I couldn't help but glance around as I moved about. Everything seemed normal. No new prints, no signs of anyone, or anything, having been here while I was gone. That thought should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. As dusk began to settle, I lit the campfire, hoping its warm glow would chase away my unease. I sat in my camping chair, sipping hot chocolate from a thermos and watching the flames dance. For a while, it worked. The crackling fire and the fading hues of the sunset were calming, almost enough to make me forget the figure I'd seen earlier. Almost. But then I noticed something odd. The forest, which had been alive with the chirps of birds and the occasional rustle of animals earlier, had gone eerily silent. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears, making you hyper-aware of every small sound. I strained to listen, but there was nothing. No crickets, no wind, nothing but the soft crackle of the fire. The unease that had been simmering all day boiled over. I stood up and shone my flashlight into the woods. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating tree trunks and bushes but revealing nothing unusual. Still, the oppressive silence persisted, making the shadows at the edge of the firelight seem darker, heavier. Then I heard it, a faint rustling, like dry leaves being disturbed. It was coming from the direction of the cirrus of the lake. I froze, flashlight in hand, as the sound grew louder, closer. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. The rustling stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear any sign of movement. Nothing. Slowly I backed toward the RV, keeping the flashlight trained on the trees. As soon as I reached the door, I climbed inside and locked it, feeling an overwhelming need to put some kind of barrier between myself and the woods. That night, I kept the blinds closed and the flashlight by my side. Sleep wouldn't come easily, and I knew deep down that whatever was out there wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained. My sleep had been restless, filled with strange, fragmented dreams of shadows moving outside the RV and whispers that seemed to come from just beyond the walls. Shaking off the lingering unease, I tried to focus on the practicalities of the day. A good breakfast and a clear head would help me reset, I thought. Stepping outside, I was greeted by the cool morning air and the golden light of the rising sun filtering through the trees. For a moment, the beauty of the scene almost made me forget my fears from the night before. Almost. As I began preparing my camp stove to make coffee, something caught my eye near the edge of the clearing. It was subtle, just a shift in the way the grass bent, as if someone had walked through it. My heart sank as I walked closer. There in the damp earth were more footprints. Unlike the ones I'd seen before, these prints didn't stop abruptly. They formed a trail, winding from the tree line toward the RV, looping around the fire pit, and then back into the sylvan woods. They were human-like but strange, with toes that seemed too long, too narrow. I crouched to get a closer look, and a chill ran through me. There was no tread pattern, no sign of shoes. These were bare feet, yet they didn't look like they belonged to any person I'd ever seen. The unease from the previous day roared back to life. I scanned the surrounding forest, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching me. But the woods were empty, still, and eerily quiet. I retreated back to the RV, locking the door behind me as if it would somehow keep the dread at bay. Trying to calm myself, I decided to check my phone for messages or weather updates, anything to distract me. That's when I noticed something strange. The battery, which I'd charged fully the night before, was nearly dead. Confused, I plugged it into the RV's power outlet, but the charging indicator didn't light up. The outlet seemed to be working fine. The small fan I'd plugged in earlier was still running. But the phone refused to charge, its screen flickering faintly before going black altogether. Frustration mixed with anxiety as I placed the dead phone on the counter. Being cut off from communication made me feel vulnerable in a way I hadn't anticipated. I'd chosen solitude, yes, but this was different. It wasn't just being alone. It was the creeping sense that something was deliberately isolating me. I tried to shake off the thought and went about my morning routine, but the unease clung to me. As I cleaned up around the campsite, I noticed small details I hadn't before. My camping chair, which I'd left folded near the fire pit, was now open and facing the woods. A pile of sticks I'd gathered for the fire was scattered as if someone had kicked it over. I didn't remember leaving things like that, but maybe I had. At least that's what I told myself. Still, the creeping sense that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. Something, or someone, had been here while I slept. And I had no idea if it would come back. By mid-morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every movement in the woods, every rustling branch or swaying shadow, made me jump. I decided to distract myself by exploring the area a bit further. If I stayed busy, maybe I could convince myself that I was just imagining things. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with essentials like water and a flashlight, and set off on a nearby trail. The forest was dense but beautiful, with sunlight dappling the ground and the scent of pine filling the air. At first the hike felt normal, even pleasant. I snapped a few pictures of the scenery, trying to enjoy the peacefulness. But as I ventured deeper, the forest began to change. The trail grew narrower, the trees thicker. The cheerful sounds of birds and rustling leaves faded into an oppressive silence. I kept walking, but with every step, the unease that had been simmering all morning grew stronger. That was when I noticed something strange. Small stacks of rocks scattered along the path. They weren't natural formations, they'd clearly been placed there by someone. The cairns looked harmless at first, but the days. Farther I went, the more unsettling they became. Each stack was slightly different, with stones balanced in ways that didn't seem possible. Some were precariously tall, others oddly symmetrical. They lined the trail, almost like markers leading deeper into the woods. My steps slowed as I stared at them, a cold chill creeping up my spine. Then I noticed something else, the prints. Just like the ones I'd seen near my RV, they were scattered along the dirt path, some overlapping with the rock cairns. The elongated toes, the strange stride, it was the same. My stomach churned as I realized they weren't just near my campsite. Whoever, or whatever, was leaving them had been here too. I considered turning back, but something ahead caught my eye. About 20 feet off the trail, half hidden behind a cluster of trees, was a clearing. The sunlight filtering through the branches illuminated what looked like a stone structure. My curiosity outweighed my fear for a brief moment, and I stepped off the trail to get a closer look. As I approached, I realized it was an old fire pit surrounded by weathered stones etched with strange symbols. They didn't look like graffiti or anything I'd seen in books. The markings were intricate, almost ritualistic, and they gave off an air of something ancient, something wrong. The fire pit was filled with ashes and charred bones, too small to belong to any large animal. A sudden snap of a branch behind me made my heart lurch. I spun around, my flashlight in hand, but I saw nothing. Just trees and shadows. But the feeling of being watched was suffocating now, stronger than ever. My hands trembled as I backed away from the clearing, my eyes darting to every corner of the woods. I didn't know what I'd just stumbled upon, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone out here. Whatever was leaving those footprints and building those cairns wasn't far away, and it was watching. My heart pounded as I retraced my steps back to the trail, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The oppressive silence of the forest was maddening, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Every crunch of leaves underfoot sounded deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. When I finally made it back to the main trail, I let out a shaky breath. I wanted to believe the eerie clearing with its strange symbols was just an old campsite left behind by someone with weird taste in decor. But deep down, I knew better. Those footprints and those stacked stones, they didn't feel random. They felt purposeful, like markers or warnings. But warnings for what? I picked up my pace, desperate to get back to the relative safety of my RV. The sunlight was beginning to wane, casting long, twisting shadows across the trail. It felt as though the woods were closing in around me, the trees standing taller and closer with every step. And then, just as I rounded a bend in the trail, I heard it. A voice. It was faint at first, so soft, I almost convinced myself it was the wind. But then it came again, clearer this time, and I froze. It was my name. Emily. The sound was chilling, stretched out and distorted, as if someone far away was trying to mimic how my name sounded. My legs locked in place as my mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe it was another camper? Maybe it was someone calling out for someone else with my name? But deep down, I knew the truth. The voice came from somewhere deeper in the woods, far off the trail where no one should be. Emily. It called again, louder this time, but still warped, like a recording played at the wrong speed. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the voice echoed through the trees, seeming to bounce around me from all directions. I broke into a run. The backpack on my shoulders thudded with each panicked step as I hurtled down the trail. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't care if I was making noise or drawing attention to myself. I just needed to get out of there. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. Not mine. These were heavier, uneven, and they were coming from somewhere behind me. I dared a glance over my shoulder but saw nothing but the trail disappearing into the shadows. The sound of those footsteps didn't stop though. They quickened, matching my own pace. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning as I sprinted the final stretch to the campsite. When I saw the RV through the trees, a sob of relief escaped me. I didn't slow down until I was inside, the door locked, and the blinds pulled shut. Collapsing onto the bed, I tried to catch my breath, but my mind was racing. Whatever was out there knew my name. It was following me. And as much as I tried to tell myself I was imagining things deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Night fell quickly, as if the forest was eager to swallow the last bits of daylight. I sat inside the RV, trying to steady my nerves. The blinds were drawn, the door locked, and I had double-checked the windows. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't truly safe. Something out there knew I was here, and it wanted me to know that. The small RV felt claustrophobic as I busied myself with mundane tasks to calm down. I heated up a can of soup on the portable stove, but the thought of eating made my stomach churn. The strange voice from earlier echoed in my mind, its warped, mocking tone replaying like a broken record. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the small interior of the RV again, even though I knew nothing had changed. It was just me, the same walls, the same old couch. But even inside, I couldn't escape the creeping dread that seemed to press against the walls, seeping through like smoke. Outside, the forest was eerily quiet again. The usual chirps of crickets and rustle of leaves were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. It was as though the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried turning on the radio for some background noise, but it only emitted a low hum of static. The silence in the RV felt deafening. Then, I heard it. A faint knock. I froze, the spoon clattering from my hand onto the counter. The knock came again, louder this time, from the door of the RV. It was deliberate, rhythmic, 3 sharp raps that made my skin crawl. I stayed perfectly still, straining to hear anything else. Maybe it was a branch hitting the RV in the wind? But there wasn't any wind. And deep down, I knew it wasn't a branch. Someone, or something, was outside. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The knock came again, louder and more insistent. My heart pounded as I inched toward the door, flashlight in hand. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Still, no response. Against every ounce of my better judgment, I peeked out through the small peephole in the door. The porch light illuminated the clearing, but there was no one there. The dirt and gravel outside were undisturbed, no sign of footsteps or movement. I stayed there for a few moments, watching, waiting, but the knocking didn't come again. Reluctantly, I stepped back from the door and tried to collect my thoughts. I must have imagined it, I told myself. The stress from the day, the eerie footprints, and the voice in the woods, it was all messing with my head. That's all it was. But as I turned back toward the small bed, my breath hitched. The blinds over one of the windows were open. I didn't remember opening them, and then I saw it. A face, pale and distorted, staring back at me through the glass. It vanished the second I blinked, leaving only the darkness of the forest behind. I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering onto the floor. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared at the window, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. The face, it was pale, almost luminous in the dark, with features stretched unnaturally wide. The eyes were the worst part, hollow, black pits that seemed to pierce straight through me. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection. But deep down, I knew better. Something had been there watching me. The RV felt unbearably small now, its walls pressing in on me. I quickly grabbed the flashlight and shone it at the window, but there was nothing outside. Just the empty darkness of the forest. My breathing came in ragged gasps as I double-checked the locks on the door and windows, my fingers trembling. I needed to think, to figure out what to do. Staying here suddenly felt like the worst possible idea. Then I heard another sound, this one closer. It wasn't a knock this time, but a low, scraping noise like nails. dragging against the metal of the RV. It started on one side and moved slowly around to the back. My blood turned to ice. Whatever it was circling the RV. The scraping stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. Maybe whatever was out there had moved on. But then came the voice. Emily! It was the same warped, drawn-out voice I'd heard on the trail, but this time it was right outside the RV. Emily, let me in. The voice sounded almost familiar, like someone I should recognize. But it was wrong, distorted, hollow, and mocking. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the voice didn't stop. It repeated my name over and over in that sickeningly sweet tone. Each time it grew louder, more insistent. Emily, open the door! I backed into the corner of the RV, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. I wanted to scream, to yell at it to go away, but my throat felt paralyzed. My mind raced with thoughts of what it could be: a prank, a wild animal, or something worse. The stories my grandmother used to tell me as a child flooded my memory, tales of things in the woods that mimic human voices to lure people out. As if sensing my fear, the voice shifted, now mimicking someone else entirely. It was my mother's voice, soft and comforting. Emily, it's me. Open the door, sweetheart. Tears welled in my eyes as I squeezed them shut. You're not real, I whispered to myself over and over. You're not real. The RV began to shake violently, as if something was slamming against it from all sides. Plates rattled in the cabinets, and my belongings fell to the floor. The voice grew louder, overlapping itself in different tones, all calling my name. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, but it was still dead, its black screen offering no salvation. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The voice went silent. I sat there in the suffocating stillness, tears streaming down my face, knowing this wasn't the end. Whatever was out there wasn't done with me yet. The stillness after the chaos was almost worse than the noise. My ears rang in the silence, and I found myself holding my breath, afraid that even the sound of exhaling might draw attention. My eyes darted around the RV, scanning every shadow, every corner, but everything was still. Too still. I needed to get out of here, but where could I go? The forest was vast and unfamiliar, and my RV felt like the only fragile barrier between me and whatever was out there. Yet, staying put felt just as dangerous. The creature, if that's what it was, had found me. It knew my name, it had been circling, taunting, and it wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted. Gathering my courage, I decided to peek outside again. Maybe I could see something, figure out if it was gone or if it was still lurking nearby. I grabbed my flashlight, keeping the beam low to avoid drawing too much attention, and crept toward the small window over the kitchenette. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the blind. What if it was there, staring back at me? My heart raced as I yanked the blind up in one quick motion. Nothing. The clearing outside was empty, bathed in faint moonlight. The fire pit was nothing but a pile of gray ashes now, and the trees at the edge of the clearing stood motionless. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe it really had gone. But that hope was short-lived. As I scanned the clearing, the flashlight beam caught something near the tree line, a pile of stacked stones. They hadn't been there before. The rocks were carefully balanced, almost identical to the cairns I'd seen earlier on the trail. My breath hitched as I realized they were arranged in a perfect semicircle, all facing the RV. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. I dropped the blind and backed away from the window, my mind racing. The cairns weren't just random markers, they were deliberate. And now they were right outside my campsite. Someone, or something, was playing with me, leaving these symbols as a warning or a challenge. And then, I heard the radio. The old CB radio mounted above the driver's seat crackled to life, filling the RV with static. I froze, staring at it in disbelief. The knob hadn't been touched, and I hadn't used it at all since arriving. The static hissed and popped, and then, through the crackling, came a distorted voice. "Emily, we're waiting." My legs buckled, and I had to grip the counter to keep from collapsing. The voice was wrong, like it was coming from underwater, garbled yet unmistakably saying my name. "Emily, come outside." I grabbed the nearest object, a hunting knife my dad had kept in the RV, and held it tightly, my knuckles white. Tears blurred my vision as I backed into the corner. The radio crackled again, and this time I could hear laughter, low, hollow, and mocking. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just watching me anymore. It wanted me to come out, and I was terrified it would find a way to force me. The laughter from the radio faded, leaving only the crackle of static. My grip on the knife tightened, my hands trembling. I couldn't stay here much longer. I needed a plan. But every rational thought was clouded by the overwhelming dread pressing in on me. My dad's old RV had always felt like a sanctuary, but now it felt like a trap, its thin walls no match for whatever was outside. Suddenly, a loud bang against the back of the RV made me jump. It was followed by another, then another, like something, or someone, was slamming their fist against the metal. I backed further into the corner, my eyes darting between the door and the windows, but all I could see were shadows dancing in the dim glow of the interior lights. "Emily," the distorted voice called again, this time louder and closer. It wasn't coming from the radio anymore, it was outside. The voice echoed through the clearing, shifting tones as it spoke, cycling between a mocking imitation of my voice and the chilling, hollow sound I'd heard on the trail. "Come out, Emily. We just want to talk." The bangs turned into scraping noises, long and deliberate, like claws dragging down the side of the RV. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight with fear. I forced myself to move, crouching low as I crept toward the front of the RV, hoping to get a better view of the clearing through the windshield. Peeking over the dashboard, I froze. Standing just beyond the ring of stacked stones was a figure. It was tall, its body unnaturally thin, almost skeletal. Its face was pale, stretched into a grotesque grin that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. But it wasn't just the sight of the figure that chilled me to the core. It was how it moved. It didn't walk or sway like a person. It stood perfectly still, but its form seemed to flicker, like an old television struggling to hold an image. My breath caught in my throat as the figure raised one long, bony arm and pointed directly at me. Even though I was inside the RV, the gesture felt like a command, a sinister demand to obey. I ducked out of sight, pressing myself against the driver's seat, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure it could hear. The banging started again, this time at the door. The voice came too, now clear and relentless, no longer trying to mimic anyone. "Open the door, Emily. We know you're in there." The words were spoken with a cold, mechanical rhythm, as if rehearsed. "You can't hide forever." My thoughts raced. I couldn't stay here. The RV wasn't safe anymore. But the idea of stepping outside, into the open with that thing, was unthinkable. I clenched the knife tighter, knowing it was probably useless against whatever this was. My dad had always taught me to be practical and prepared, but nothing he'd ever said could have prepared me for this. Another loud bang at the door made me jump, and I knew I had to act. Staying here would only make me an easy target. Whatever was outside wanted me to break, and I couldn't let it win. Summoning every ounce of courage, I formulated a desperate plan to escape, but deep down, I wasn't sure if I'd make it out alive. My body felt paralyzed with fear, but my mind screamed at me to move. The RV shook violently as the banging grew more intense, and the scraping noises became a chorus of sharp, grating sounds against the metal. The voice outside called my name again, now with a cruel edge that sent chills down my spine. "Emily, come out! Let us in!" I clenched the knife, my hands slick with sweat. Staying here wasn't an option anymore. The RV was too small, too vulnerable, and whatever was out there wasn't going to give up. My only hope was to get out and run, though where I could go in the dark, I didn't know. My eyes darted to the emergency hatch above the bed, a small skylight my dad had always insisted was just in case. This was definitely just in case. I grabbed my backpack, shoving the flashlight, water bottle, and a lighter inside. The knife stayed in my grip as I climbed onto the bed, my legs trembling as I reached for the hatch. My fingers fumbled with the latch, my heart hammering louder than the pounding outside. Finally, it gave way with a metallic click, and I pushed the hatch open, cold night air rushing in. The moment I popped my head out, the forest greeted me with its oppressive stillness. The clearing looked almost peaceful under the pale moonlight, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I scanned the area, searching for the figure I'd seen earlier, but it was gone. The stacked stones near the tree line remained, an ominous reminder that this thing wasn't just wandering aimlessly, it had a purpose. With a deep breath, I hoisted myself through the hatch and onto the roof of the RV. The metal groaned under my weight, and I froze, listening. The banging on the door had stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. My pulse thundered in my ears as I crouched low, gripping the knife tightly. Had it heard me? Was it waiting? And then I saw it. The figure emerged from the shadows near the stacked stones, gliding toward the RV without a sound. Its movements were unnatural, as though it wasn't constrained by gravity. My blood ran cold as it tilted its head, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. Didn't speak this time. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was suffocating, its grin widening unnaturally as it reached a long skeletal arm toward me. Without thinking, I scrambled down the side of the RV, my boots hitting the ground hard. I bolted toward the trail, my flashlight swinging wildly as I ran. The air seemed to hum with tension, and the trees loomed like silent witnesses. I didn't look back, too terrified of what I might see. Behind me, the voice returned, but this time it wasn't calling my name. It was laughing. Low, guttural, and impossibly close, the sound followed me as I fled into the woods. The figure didn't need to chase me. It knew the forest, and it knew I was running straight into its domain. Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted blindly through the dark woods. My flashlight beam bounced erratically, illuminating brief flashes of trees and undergrowth, before plunging back into darkness. The laughter, low and guttural, seemed to echo from everywhere, growing louder the further I ran. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for rest, but I couldn't stop. Stopping meant facing whatever that thing was. I stumbled over a root, crashing to the ground. The flashlight flew from my hand and landed a few feet away, its beam now pointing up into the trees. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled to retrieve it, the knife still clutched in my other hand. When I grabbed the flashlight, the beam illuminated something that made my stomach drop. A cairn. Another stack of stones, impossibly balanced, sitting directly in my path. It wasn't there before, I was sure of it. I looked around frantically, realizing I was no longer on the trail. The forest around me seemed unfamiliar, the trees pressing in closer than before. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was lost. "Emily?" The voice came again, slow and mocking, cutting through the stillness. I spun around, shining the flashlight in every direction, but there was nothing. The laughter started again, this time softer, as if it was coming from just behind me. My grip tightened on the knife as I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. The figure stood just a few feet away, partially hidden behind a tree. Its face, if you could even call it that, was grotesque, pale, and stretched into an exaggerated grin. Its hollow eyes glinted in the flashlight beam, and its long, spindly fingers gripped the trunk of the tree as it leaned out, watching me. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stared, its presence so unnatural that every instinct in me screamed to run. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, frozen in place by sheer terror. The figure tilted its head, its grin widening as it stepped closer. The way it moved was wrong, jerky and disjointed, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. It stopped just outside the reach of my flashlight's beam, its form flickering in and out of focus, as if it wasn't fully in this world. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, brandishing the knife in front of me. My voice was shaky, but it was the only weapon I had. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, it took another step closer, its grin widening until it seemed to split its face in two. Suddenly, the ground beneath me felt different. The soft dirt gave way to a rough, uneven surface. I glanced down and realized I was standing in a circle of the same strange symbols I'd seen earlier, etched into the ground around the cairn. My blood ran cold. This wasn't random. I'd been led here. The figure let out a low rumbling sound, half laugh, half growl, and raised a hand, pointing directly at me. My flashlight flickered, the beam growing weaker as the oppressive darkness closed in. I had to get out of there. Now. My hands trembled as I gripped the flashlight and knife, the symbols beneath my feet burning themselves into my mind. It felt like standing inside some ancient trap, one I hadn't realized I was walking into until it was too late. The figure moved closer, its elongated fingers twitching as if it were testing the air between us. The grin on its face stretched impossibly wide, and its hollow eyes seemed to pulse with an unnatural light. I stepped backward, my boots crunching against the dirt, but the symbols and the ground stopped me. Each step I took, the figure seemed to glide forward in response, matching my retreat with an eerie calmness. It wasn't rushing, it didn't need to. It knew I was trapped. Summoning what little courage I had left, I yelled, "Stay back!" My voice cracked, but the knife in my hand gave me a fragile sense of control. I slashed the air between us, hoping to deter it, but the creature didn't even flinch. It tilted its head, as if amused by my attempt. Then it spoke. "Why are you afraid, Emily?" The voice was no longer distorted. It was calm, smooth, almost human, but that only made it worse. It sounded close, as if it were whispering directly into my ear, though the figure was still several feet away. "You came here alone. Is this not what you wanted?" My breath caught in my throat. The words hit too close to home, echoing thoughts I'd been avoiding since I left Seattle. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear and guilt that the creature seemed to stir up. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. It didn't answer. Instead, it raised one hand and pointed toward the cairn behind me. The stacked stones seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and a faint hum filled the air. The sound grew louder, vibrating through my chest, as the symbols beneath me began to glow faintly. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight as the ground beneath the cairn began to shift. A deep crack split the earth beneath the stones, and from it came a foul, acrid smell that made me gag. The hum turned into a low rumble, like something was waking up below the surface. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the dark void opening beneath the cairn. "You don't belong here," the creature said, its voice soft but menacing. "But you were drawn here, weren't you? By your loneliness, your pain. They called to you." I couldn't respond. My legs felt weak, my mind a chaotic swirl of terror and disbelief. The creature stepped closer, now only a few feet away. Its presence was suffocating, as though the very air around it had turned cold and heavy. This was no ordinary predator. It wasn't hunting me for sport or survival. It wanted something deeper, something I didn't understand. And as the ground continued to rumble beneath me, I realized I had to make a choice: stand my ground or find a way to escape before the darkness consumed me. The rumbling intensified, and the glow of the symbols beneath my feet grew brighter, casting eerie, flickering light up into the dark forest. It was as though the earth itself was alive, responding to the presence of the creature. My instincts screamed at me to move, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer otherworldliness of what was happening. The creature took another step forward, now so close I could see its skin, or what passed for skin. It looked stretched and thin, like parchment pulled too tightly over bone. Its grin widened further, impossibly grotesque, splitting its face almost in half. I could hear it breathing now, a slow, hollow rasp, as if it were savoring the moment. "Emily," it said again, its voice dripping with mockery. "You can't run. You've already given yourself to us." The words sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Given myself? What did it mean? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Then I remembered. The cairns, the symbols, the voice calling my name. This wasn't random. I'd been lured here, guided step by step by something that had been watching me long before I ever set foot in this forest. "No," I muttered, more to myself than to the creature. "You don't own me. I didn't ask for this." The creature's grin faltered for the first time, replaced by something darker: anger. It raised one skeletal hand, its long fingers curling into a fist. The air around me seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest and making it hard to breathe. The flashlight in my hand flickered wildly, its beam sputtering as if it were fighting to stay alive. "You don't understand," it hissed, its voice no longer smooth but jagged, like shards of glass. "You chose this, Emily. Your pain, your fear, they called to us. You came." The pressure around me grew stronger, and I fell to my knees, gasping for air. My knife clattered to the ground, and the light from the flashlight dimmed further, casting the forest in near total darkness. The only light came from the glowing symbols and the faint, pulsing shimmer of the cairn behind me. I gritted my teeth, fighting the suffocating force. My dad's voice echoed in my head, a memory from long ago. "Fear is only as strong as you let it be. When you're backed into a corner, you fight. Always fight." Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I reached for the knife, my fingers closing around the cold metal. The creature tilted its head, its hollow eyes narrowing as it sensed my defiance. "You can't fight us," it whispered, its voice now echoing with multiple tones, as if it were a chorus of voices speaking at once. "You are nothing here." I didn't answer. Instead, I lunged forward, slashing the knife toward the creature with everything I had. The blade cut through the air, and for a moment, I thought it would connect. But as it struck, the creature dissolved into a wisp of shadow, vanishing before my eyes. The pressure around me lifted, and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The laughter returned, low and distant, as if the creature was mocking me from somewhere unseen. I looked at the cairn behind me, its glow now pulsating faster. Whatever I had done, it wasn't over yet. If anything, I had just made it angry. The forest erupted in chaos around me. The symbols beneath my feet flickered violently, their light casting jagged shadows that danced across the trees. The ground trembled as if something far below was stirring, and the air grew colder, biting at my skin. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I stared at the cairn. Its glow had intensified, and the dark crack beneath it now pulsed with an otherworldly red light. The creature's laughter still echoed, now from every direction surrounding me. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many, overlapping and discordant, a cacophony of mocking tones. I stumbled to my feet, clutching the knife like a lifeline. The cairn hummed louder, and I felt an overwhelming urge to step closer to it, as if something was pulling me toward the pit. My legs resisted, but my mind felt foggy, almost hypnotized. A loud crack split the air, and I whipped around to see another figure emerging from the trees. It wasn't the same as before. This one was shorter, hunched, and its movements were more erratic. Its body jerked as it moved, like it was being yanked forward by invisible strings. Its eyes glowed faintly like embers, and its mouth twisted into an expression that wasn't quite a grin, but something far more sinister. "No," I whispered, backing away from the cairn and the new figure. My flashlight flickered again, struggling to stay on, but I refused to let the darkness take over completely. I pointed the beam toward the creature, and for a brief moment it froze. Its glowing eyes narrowed, and its twisted mouth let out a sharp, guttural hiss that made my stomach churn. The light. It didn't like the light. Realizing this, I adjusted my grip on the flashlight, aiming it directly at the creature. It recoiled slightly, its jerky movements becoming more hesitant. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice stronger this time. I took a step forward, forcing the beam closer to it. The creature hissed again, but instead of retreating, it began circling me, its body flickering like a flame in the wind. Behind me, the cairn pulsed faster, and I could hear something rising from the pit, a deep, guttural growl that made the ground vibrate beneath my feet. The pull toward the pit grew stronger, and I felt my legs start to weaken. I dug my boots into the dirt, refusing to move any closer, but the invisible force was relentless. The hunched creature darted toward me suddenly, and I swung the flashlight, the beam slicing through its form. It let out a shriek and dissolved into shadow, scattering like smoke on the wind. My heart pounded in my chest, but there was no time to celebrate. The growling from the pit grew louder, and the pull became unbearable. I turned toward the cairn, the knife in one hand and the flashlight in the other. If the light could repel the creatures, maybe I could use it to disrupt whatever was happening here. But as I stepped closer, the ground cracked wider, and a hand, skeletal, blackened, and impossibly large, emerged from the pit, clawing at the earth. My breath caught. I wasn't just dealing with one creature. Whatever I had disturbed, it was much worse than I had imagined. The skeletal hand clawed at the ground, pulling more of itself from the pit. Its blackened, twisted fingers were impossibly long, each tipped with jagged, razor-like claws that tore into the dirt. The cairn's glow turned a deep blood red, pulsing faster and faster, as if it were alive and feeding energy into whatever was emerging. I stumbled back, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My gaze was locked on the pit as a massive head began to rise. Its form was shrouded in shadow, its hollow eyes burning with the same ember-like glow as the smaller creature I'd faced moments ago. Its grin stretched wide across its face, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The laughter returned, low and guttural, reverberating through the forest like a vibration in my chest. This wasn't just a creature. It was something ancient, something that shouldn't exist in this world. And it was looking directly at me. "Emily," it rumbled, its voice impossibly deep, layered with a chorus of other tones. "You cannot escape. You belong to us now." The pull toward the pit grew unbearable, my feet sliding forward against my will. My flashlight flickered again, its beam weakening as the oppressive darkness pressed in around me. I gripped the knife tighter, my knuckles white, and forced myself to think. My dad's words echoed in my mind once more. "When you're backed into a corner, you fight." I wasn't strong enough to overpower this thing, but maybe I didn't have to. My eyes darted to the cairn, the source of the glowing energy feeding the creature. The stones were vibrating now, almost hovering in place, as if tethered to the pit by some invisible force. The symbols etched into the ground pulsed in rhythm with the cairn's light. The cairn was the key. If I could disrupt it, maybe I could stop this. I forced myself to move, fighting against the pull of the pit as I lunged toward the cairn. The creature roared, its voice shaking the ground beneath me. One massive claw swiped in my direction, tearing into the earth inches from where I had been standing. I didn't hesitate. Using all my strength, I swung the flashlight down onto the cairn. The stones shattered on impact, scattering in every direction like shards of glass. The effect was immediate. The glowing symbols flickered wildly before vanishing entirely, plunging the clearing into darkness. The pit let out a deafening roar, and the skeletal hand clawed desperately at the ground, trying to hold its place. The massive head turned toward me, its ember-like eyes blazing with fury. "You cannot stop us," it bellowed, its voice shaking the air. But I wasn't listening anymore. I swung the knife into the center of the pit, driving it deep into the earth. The ground beneath me shook violently, and the creature let out a final, ear-splitting shriek before it began to sink back into the pit, its massive form disintegrating into shadow. The pull vanished, and the air grew still. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, my hands trembling as I clung to the flashlight and knife. The clearing was silent now, the cairn destroyed, the pit nothing more than a dark scar in the earth. I didn't wait to see if the creature would return. Scrambling to my feet, I fled back toward the trail, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. Whatever had been awakened, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't staying to find out if it was truly gone. The forest was silent as I stumbled back onto the trail, my legs barely holding me up. My lungs burned with every gasping breath, and my hands trembled so badly that I nearly dropped the flashlight. The knife, still stained with dirt from the pit, felt heavier in my grip than it should have. The events of the past few minutes, or hours, I couldn't tell anymore, spun in my head like a fever dream. The darkness around me felt less oppressive now, but it didn't feel safe. The shadows no longer moved unnaturally, and the low hum of the cairn was gone, yet the forest seemed to be holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I forced myself to keep moving one step at a time, toward what I hoped was the direction of my RV. Every crunch of leaves underfoot sounded deafening in the quiet, and my flashlight beam seemed to grow weaker with every step. My mind raced, replaying the creature's words. "You belong to us now." What had it meant? Why me? I thought back to the symbols, the footprints, the cairns. It all felt deliberate, like I had been led here, like it had been waiting for me. The thought made my skin crawl. Had I done enough to stop it? Or had I only delayed the inevitable? After what felt like hours, I finally saw a faint glow in the distance. My RV relief surged through me, giving me the strength to quicken my pace. The sight of the familiar vehicle, its chipped paint and sturdy frame illuminated by the porch light, felt like a lifeline. I stumbled into the clearing, my knees nearly buckling as I reached the door. I yanked it open and slammed it shut behind me, locking the deadbolt and sliding down onto the floor. For a moment, I just sat there, my back pressed against the door, staring into the dim interior of the RV. It felt quiet, safe, normal. But I couldn't relax. Not yet. I turned the flashlight off and tossed it onto the counter before crawling to the driver's seat. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, which were thankfully still in the ignition. The engine roared to life, the sound filling the silence and grounding me for the first time in hours. The headlights pierced the darkness outside, revealing nothing but empty forest. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to leave. I gripped the steering wheel and put the RV in gear, the tires crunching over gravel as I pulled out of the clearing. The trail back to the main road was rough, the RV jostling with every bump and dip, but I didn't dare slow down. As the clearing disappeared behind me, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My breath caught. For a split second, I thought I saw movement in the trees, something tall, dark, and grinning. But when I blinked, it was gone. I pressed the gas harder, my only thought now to get as far away from this place as possible. The dirt road seemed endless, winding through the dark forest as if trying to keep me trapped there forever. Every shadow cast by the RV's headlights looked like it could spring to life at any moment. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my eyes darted constantly between the road and the rearview mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was following me. The engine groaned as I hit another pothole, jarring me so hard that I nearly lost control. I slowed just enough to regain my grip, but refused to stop. Stopping wasn't an option. Not here. My mind raced with memories of the creature, the cairns, and the symbols. The pit. The thing that had crawled out of it. Had I truly stopped it? The road finally opened up into a wider clearing, and I saw a weathered wooden sign up ahead. Main road 2 miles. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. 2 miles felt like an eternity out here, especially when every nerve in my body screamed that I wasn't alone. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping, faint but distinct, coming from the back of the RV. My stomach twisted, and I froze. It couldn't be real. It had to be the jostling of the road, a loose cabinet door, anything but what I feared most. But the tapping continued, steady and deliberate. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, my heart hammering in my chest. The interior of the RV was dim, the faint glow from the dashboard barely illuminating the back. But as I strained my eyes, I thought I saw movement. Something shifting in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the light. "Keep driving," I whispered to myself, my voice shaky. "Just keep driving." The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. But then, a voice broke through the silence, a voice I recognized all too well. "Emily!" It was faint, almost a whisper, but it was unmistakable. My name spoken in that same distorted, mocking tone I had heard back in the clearing. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't outside the RV. It was inside. I slammed on the brakes, the RV skidding to a halt in the middle of the road. My hands shook as I grabbed the flashlight and knife from the passenger seat. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to confirm what I already knew. But I couldn't ignore it either. Slowly, I twisted in my seat, shining the flashlight toward the back of the RV. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the small kitchenette, the table, and the narrow hallway leading to the bed. At first, everything looked normal. Empty. Quiet. But then, near the corner of the bed, I saw it. A faint outline of something tall and hunched, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the light. Before I could react, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging the RV into darkness once more. The darkness was suffocating, pressing in on me like a physical weight. My chest tightened as I fumbled with the flashlight, slapping it against my palm in desperation. The light sputtered back to life for a brief moment, and I caught another glimpse of it. The figure standing at the far end of the RV, hunched and impossibly still, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the beam. "Emily!" The voice came again, low and guttural, as if it were crawling through the very air around me. I didn't think. I acted. Clutching the knife in one hand and the flashlight in the other, I lunged toward the dashboard and slammed my foot on the gas. The RV roared to life, lurching forward violently as the tires skidded on the gravel road. My grip on the steering wheel was shaky, but I didn't dare let go. I didn't look back, didn't try to see if it was still there. I couldn't. If I saw it again, I might lose what little composure I had left. The RV bounced and swayed as I sped down the narrow dirt road, branches scraping against the sides. Like nails on a chalkboard, the tapping started again, this time on the roof. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't inside anymore. It was on top. The sound grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was up there was crawling, dragging itself toward the front of the vehicle. I gritted my teeth, trying to focus on the road as the tapping turned into a scraping noise, like claws raking against the metal. I could hear it shifting, its weight causing the RV to sway slightly with each movement. "Not again," I muttered, my voice barely audible over the engine's roar. "Not again!" The main road was close. I could see the faint glimmer of asphalt just ahead. I pushed the RV harder, the engine groaning in protest as the vehicle lurched over the final stretch of rough terrain. The scraping above me stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. I knew better than to believe it was over. As the RV hit the paved road, I swerved hard, nearly losing control as I tried to shake whatever was on the roof. The sudden jolt sent me crashing into the steering wheel, but I heard a loud thud as something heavy slid off the back of the RV. My heart pounded as I glanced in the rearview mirror, hoping, praying, that I'd left it behind. In the dim glow of the taillights, I saw the figure lying on the road, its body twisted unnaturally. For a brief moment, I thought I'd defeated it. But then it began to move. Slowly, methodically, it rose to its feet, its glowing eyes locking onto mine through the mirror. That grin, stretched wide across its face, was the last thing I saw before I floored the gas and sped away. I didn't stop until I reached the first town. The RV finally came to a halt in the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station. My hands were still trembling as I stepped out, collapsing onto the pavement, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The attendant inside gave me a concerned look but didn't ask questions. I didn't offer any answers. Even now, as I sit here trying to process what happened, I can still feel its presence, lingering just beyond the edge of my thoughts. Whatever it was, I know it's not over. The forest didn't let me go. It let me leave, just for now. And that's why I'll never set foot in those woods again. What started as a quest for peace turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. Have you ever experienced something terrifying while camping or traveling alone? I'd love to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who loves a good scare. Make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes it's better not to go alone.